27 years, this conference itself has grown from a couple of hundred of folks talking about a niche asset class with very little data for comparison or benchmarking, to that we have today, which is really a dynamic forum with hundreds of companies talking about how they can move the seniors housing and care space forward. Over the course of the last 27 years, transparency's increased dramatically with some benchmark time series data that allow investors to understand risk and identify opportunities. NIC, again, as a 501c3 organization, has played a significant role in improving transparency in the space. We've also been instrumental to convening thought leaders to have discussions around the issues that seniors housing and care is facing and that we'll face in the future as well. But at the end of the day, as an organization, it's people that power the organization. It's people that really put together the strategy. It's people that turn strategy into initiatives. It's people who turn those initiatives into action, and it's those people's actions that ultimately cause change that can influence an industry that cares for millions of America's seniors. Now, we've been fortunate to have some fantastic volunteer leaders over the course of the many years, and those volunteer leaders have been instrumental really in moving the initiatives, NIC's initiatives forward. But the person at the helm for the last 27 years, really the person who's been the steward of the long-term vision, the person who has guided staff, the person who has rallied hundreds, if not thousands of volunteer leaders, has been Bob Kramer. So Bob has moved into a role now as founder and strategic advisor. And as founder and strategic advisor, Bob's role right now is really as an icebreaker, as a scout, and as an ambassador to those constituencies outside of our traditional brick and mortar constituencies. He's looking for those relationships that are going to help NIC move forward in the years to come. I've been honored and humbled to take over the role as president and CEO. Over the course of the last 27 years, NIC has done a fantastic job, and I'm really looking forward to help continue that tradition of providing transparency and enabling connections in the seniors housing and care space. Bob, I want to thank you for the guidance that you've provided to NIC over the many years. I want to thank you for the guidance you've provided to me, and I want to thank you in advance for the guidance you'll provide to NIC in the future as well. So I've had the opportunity to get to know Bob over the last 2 years. I have had an opportunity to see his passion, his energy, his leadership, and also the devotion to his family, with his wife Diane here, his sister, his 2 daughters, 2 of 3 daughters here, as well as his brother-in-law. But while I've known Bob for the past several years, we have a short video to share with you of some seniors and housing care leaders that have known Bob over the past several decades.
The personality trait I most admire in Bob is his integrity. I've seen him in the beginning with our industry when no one was around and still act with integrity. Likewise, in front of the camera or the regulators or our Congress, integrity.
If I were to describe you in one word, it would be driven. Driven to build consensus and always do what is right and in the best interest of those around you.
Purpose. And Bob's purpose, from my perspective, is all about improving the quality of life of everyone that comes in contact with him.
NIC gave seniors housing and care industry capital markets credibility. Without the clarity and transparency offered by NIC, capital flows to the sector would be limited. Bob drove those initiatives.
Bob has the ability to connect people and ideas to achieve outcomes. He established senior housing and care real estate as a separate asset class.
His leadership at NIC has steered the organization ahead of the challenges the industry has faced and the changes in the market.
You've been a great steward of the industry over the last 27 years. You've clearly one of the top resources that people would turn to whenever they have a question about the industry, and have done a great deal for us. So we owe you. We're indebted to you.
Your contributions towards smart public and investment policy in this area has literally allowed senior housing to become one of the most desirable investment classes, and more importantly, has allowed our seniors to age successfully and with dignity. You have had a magnificent career and utterly changed the trajectory of an industry for the positive.
All of my success and accomplishments have been in large part a result of our friendship together, and I couldn't be more grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, friend, for all you've done for the industry, and a special thanks to Diane for supporting you all these years.
I want to wish you the best, because that's what you give. I can't wait to see the next chapter of this incredible story that you've created. Thank you, Bob.
What a great video, and I also want to thank everyone that contributed to that video. I think it also speaks incredibly highly of all the relationships Bob has built over the many years. I also have with us here today two former board chairs and a current board chair here to say a couple words as well. First up is Bill Shine, currently with Synovus Bank, and Bill was board chair from 1995 to 1997. Bill?
It's a pleasure to be here. A house, though, is only as strong as its foundation, and Bob Kramer is our foundation for NIC. In 1990, the senior housing industry needed an individual who was above the fray, truly above the fray, neither a lender, investor, or operator. Bob was able to balance competing agendas and guided our efforts while keeping focus on the organization's founding mission. In the beginning, two goals. Very simple. First, to be the annual forum bringing together lenders, investors, equity, operators, and developers to meet and share information, discuss issues, and to pitch each other. The hoped-for outcome was to create a community for decision makers in the senior housing and care marketplace. Second, to establish the senior housing industry as a credible investment class for institutional lenders and investors, resulting in increased access to capital to meet the needs of a very, truly demanding, capital-intensive business. It was often herding cats, but Bob persevered, and NIC efforts bore fruit in the early years between 1990 and 1997, also dating myself. Beginning in 1990 officially, NIC attendance started modestly with several hundred, but each successive year, significant increases. When attendance 650, believe it or not, we all despaired that it was getting too large. There is no question today, with attendance over 2,500, close to 3,000, that NIC is the national meeting that will be on everyone's calendar. Truly, everyone has used this phrase, are you going to NIC this year, and do you have time to meet? In 1997, the NIC Investment Guide, Investing in Senior Housing and Care Properties, was the product of many to document the growing demand for care by the aging population and how that need was met by the different care providers, IL, AL, MC, and SNF. The guide also illustrated, to me, probably the most important part, the extent each provider type provided services, payment for services, versus rent, which is real estate income. The best example is assisted living. The monthly charge could be broken down to 40% real estate, rent, and 60% services. Defining the market, demand-driven 80s and older, detailing each provider type and how they were paid for what services was a key first step in opening the senior housing industry to a larger source of capital. If you don't know what it is, you can't lend to it or invest in it. In 1990, I could count active lenders literally on two hands. Today, there are over 1,000 attendees registered as capital providers. Who would have thought when two guys, Bob Kramer and Al Holbrook, were sitting in a pancake restaurant in Atlanta, sketching out a plan for a new conference, would lead to today? Well done, thank you. I have a special comment from a NIC lifer. Arnold Whitman, this is his first miss in 27 years. We're going to give him a pass. Bob, thank you for your vision, the mission, the guidance, the determination, the dedication, and most importantly, your friendship. Sorry I cannot be there for your day of recognition. I will now turn it over to Kathy Sweeney, Blue Mountain Capital, NIC Chair from 2007 to 2009.
Thank you, Bill. Hi, Bob. Bob Kramer is a disruptor. Said differently, Bob is a visionary and a transformer. My job and my privilege is to speak about Bob's legacy in the middle years. While Bob accomplished many things in this time period, perhaps his signature contribution is the transformation of NIC from an exclusively networking organization to an organization known as well for its robust and sought-after data evidenced by NIC MAP. In the late 1990s, Bob had his hat handed to him by public pension funds with whom he met to advance investments in the seniors housing sector. They warned him that seniors housing would not be an acceptable asset class of scale without transparency. The equity investors backing seniors housing in the 1990s were considered pioneers, willing to seek yield by investing in a niche real estate segment difficult to assess. And they were rewarded with high returns by capitalizing on the sector's opaqueness. But the users of capital, namely operators, were not happy. And Bob knew he must heed the advice of institutional investors if capital flows were to increase. So, in 2001, Bob led the NIC Strategic Planning Committee through a process that would approve a pilot for NIC MAP with an initial budget of $500,000. And this is where I came in, as my tenure on the NIC board came immediately thereafter. Bob expertly reached out to two capital providers to co-chair NIC MAP, one from the public sector, Ray Braun from Welltower, and one from the private sector, me. Over the course of 2 years, with Bob's support and encouragement, we convened a NIC MAP task force of leading capital providers and operators. We engaged Margaret Wild's group ProMature to collect and synthesize data, and we chose Charlotte, North Carolina as our first pilot market. The results had all the markings of a failed experiment. It revealed how difficult this undertaking would be. Bob kept us together and moving forward, leading us to solutions meeting each challenge. Perhaps what was most remarkable for me, though, was the willingness of operators to provide information on every one of their communities to NIC. Sure, they would benefit from decreased cost of capital as investments increase with transparency, but that was in the future. And in the present, most operators were resource constrained. Not only that, but they were providing private data to an external user, and trust was paramount. Through Bob's leadership, NIC became synonymous with integrity and trust. Were it not for the character of NIC's board leadership, built by Bob, NIC MAP would not have been possible. And so today, here we stand with, as Bill said, around 20 investors attending NIC before the NIC MAP in the early conferences, to today, over 1,000 registered capital providers in the audience. As a private equity investor for the past 20 years, I can personally tell you that indeed the cost of capital has decreased. Thank you, Bob. And now I'd like to turn it over to Brad Razuk of CS Capital Advisors, and Brad is the current NIC chair.
Thank you, Kathy. So the key to any good tribute is hyperbole, so here we go. In 1991, a smart, energetic, politically savvy, forward-thinking Robert G. Kramer, Bob to us, attached himself to a powerful, difficult-to-control, fuel-laden rocket ship, now known as the seniors housing and care industry, and said, blast off. Of course, what Bob was really thinking was, let's see if we can keep this thing under control. Back then, the industry consisted of a soon-to-be rapidly consolidating skilled nursing industry and the fledgling assisted living industry. Bob recognized the future and the corresponding need for capital, data, and discipline, also known as quality of care, and set out to provide all three through what is now affectionately known as NIC. As you heard before, the first NIC conference was, in 1991, was attended by just over 400 people, included amazingly insightful breakout sessions like what is assisted living, and we usually featured a soon-to-be bankrupt industry CEO as our keynote speaker. It was a little bit like the Sports Illustrated curse at the time. This year, we have 3,000 attendees, hugely insightful content and sessions, notable speakers such as Speaker Gingrich, Dr. Summers, and Paul Irving of the Milken Institute. This dramatic transformation over a 27-year period is all attributable to the hard work of Bob Kramer and his uncanny ability to obtain the commitment of hundreds of industry volunteers. The transformation wasn't as easy as it appears today. The industry had to weather many storms, including the dual disasters of the late 90s, of overbuilding in AL and PPS on the skilled nursing side, and as well as the financial crisis of the mid-2000s. At one point in the late 1990s, there were about 60 publicly traded companies in the seniors housing and care space, now just a handful. Conversely, the size and number of healthcare REITs has mushroomed. Not every conference was without its challenges. There was the rescheduling of NIC in the aftermath of 9/11, and who can forget NIC 2002 with the DC sniper on the loose. As we sit here today, we have a not mature, but rapidly maturing senior housing and care industry consisting of post-acute care, AL, IL, memory care, CCRCs, along with home health, hospice, and many related ancillary services. As you've heard from Kathy and others, of all of Bob's contributions to the industry, perhaps the most significant one was his commitment to transparency and the provision of reliable industry data. I firmly believe that because of Bob's vision and commitment and incredible talent, our industry is years ahead of where it would be today without Bob. Everyone here today owes an enormous debt of gratitude to Bob Kramer. So Bob, on behalf of all of us who toil away in the seniors housing and care sector or financing it, we thank you for your enormous contributions. And as you transition to your new role as senior advisor and mentor to Brian, we would like to present you with a couple small tokens of our gratitude. If you could come on up. So I don't know how we see it, but I'll show you first, and then this is what was on the screen. So Brian, maybe you can hold that in there. So we have an impressive artistic rendering, which is based on your best attributes compiled from the video tribute, which includes such terms as leader, innovator, integrity, and above all, friend. In addition, it's our privilege to present you with this custom Baltimore Orioles jersey with your name and the number 27, representing the number of years you've presided over NIC. So thank you. I'd like to turn the podium over to Bob. Thank you.
Wow. I'm honored, I'm a little bit embarrassed, humbled, and most of all thankful. I will confess some things are true. I am doggedly persistent, some would say annoyingly. I am consistently passionate. I'm always strategic with a vision. And yes, at times I'm a bit verbose. In fact, Brian was so concerned that I would get up here and not get down fast enough so that our program would move along, and Paul, that I would steal time from you, that he forgot to tell me that he wanted me to say something. But, you know, knowing me, I'm not at a loss for words, so I managed to, you know, in a little bit of time I had to think about it, think of a few things that I would like to share with you all. I'm not going to go through the whole history of NIC, but seriously, I just want to comment for a moment because I think it's so important for the future of this organization and so important for the future of our industry, and most importantly, so important to the future of how we view and think about our elders and approach aging and aging services. So what makes NIC work? Why have we been successful as an organization? And why will we continue to be successful under Brian Jorutka's leadership? Well, the answer simply is because, though it reduces me to tears to hear some of the comments that from the video and from Kathy and Bill and Brad from the podium, it's not about Bob Kramer. It's ultimately success in life, whether it's business, whether it's one's personal life, is ultimately about people and relationships and the nurturing of trust in those relationships. Whether it's trust in our brand as NIC, trust in our data, our analytics, our conference experience that we provide each of you who pay, I know it's not cheap to be here, in our conference content. And I would say, underlying all that, trust in our motives, in our intentions. That what we want for this industry is to not figure out how we can, you know, increase the value of NIC so we can charge even more for our products and services and all make a killing. Know that we truly care about this sector and we care about the residents that we serve. And so we want to increase the flows of the right kind of capital to the space. We want to help the industry grow up and mature. And now I would say we want to help the industry think about how it's going to reinvent itself, because it will have to. How it's going to think about its future as it deals with a different customer who's much more demanding, as it deals with delivering on the promise to the adult daughter, because that's really ultimately the promise we're making, that we really will provide, we will take those headaches away and provide coordination and care management and coordination such that they're not paying us $4,000 or $6,000 a month, but they're having to run around with all the burden of all the worry about mom and coordinating care, coordinating healthcare records, coordinating lifestyle options, and so forth. So, again, all of that trust comes down to relationships. And I think that in these last couple moments, since I have the mic, I do want to take a couple moments to talk about who are the people, the relationships. Because I'm an enabler. I've often said to many of you, I'm not an original thinker. I've never financed a building in my life. I've never run a building for a day. So, you know, everyone has to take everything I say with a grain of salt. That said, I've been really fortunate to surround myself with bright, talented, caring people who get excited about being united about a common, positive vision for the future that they're willing to put their energies behind. So first of all, I want to acknowledge our volunteer leaders. Brian's already made a comment about that, but it's highly unusual. We have a very hands-on participatory board, and always have had. Every major initiative of this organization has had at least one and usually two volunteer champions from the board that have stood up and said, no, yes, we're all busy. We run our companies, we have leadership positions, but no, this is important. And in particular, what that's meant is that we've had board members, board chairs, who, as I've often put it, are willing to take off their company hat and put on the hat of what's best for this industry and what's best as we look to the future, not the next quarter, but the longer-term future. NIC's been a long-term vision. We're not there yet. Putting in a plug, Brian, we don't yet have time series data on financial performance at the local property level, NOI performance. Without that, we don't have meaningful transparency to other commercial real estate property types. We don't have a uniform chart of accounts. And not everyone has the resources of the big REITs to hire, 20 to 50 bright young analysts to try and normalize all those unbelievably confusing financial statements. So we still have a ways to go, but we will get there. But our volunteer leaders have been exceptional, and that's what's made this role of mine such a joy to work with, those leaders. And there's not time I could single out each one for the way in which they've contributed. But I do want to, Kathy and Ray Braun, who took the leadership on NIC MAP, they sold it to their peers. Kevin McMean, who championed the idea that we should do a second conference, which turned out to be something incredibly important in terms of our whole strategic plan. I want to mention Thilo Best and John Moore, because they did something for me, with me, and really thinking about the future that was very unusual for board chairs to do. And that is, they thought about, this is a growing organization in a growing industry. Do we have the infrastructure in place for the future? That was not my strong suit. Worrying about, I'm a visionary, and I'm off charging. So much so that every time I would go on a trip, my staff would often cringe when I came back, because I just had so many ideas about things we could do. But Thilo, back in the early 2000s, and John, recently, were both people that spent a lot of time with me, with the board, and with the staff, thinking about how do we build the infrastructure for a long-term, impactful organization in this space. And that isn't sexy as some of the external initiatives we've done, but literally it's just as important. So I've been blessed to get great people involved and unite them around a common shared positive vision of what we could do for elders and what we could do for this industry. So that's been a joy. I also want to just mention, as staff, I obviously haven't done this by myself at all. And in fact, again, hiring great people who are really talented and who share that vision but know how to implement it. And when I think of the early days of working with Tony Mullen, who taught me an awful lot about the industry, because I frankly didn't know that much, and he was enormously helpful, and he served in a volunteer role, he served in a staff role, and really drove our thinking about research initially. When I think of Harvey Singer, our first formal research director. When I think of Mike Hargrave, who played a key role in launching and really establishing the credibility of the NIC MAP Data Service. Elisa Infante Freeman, who really took our whole events process to another level of professionalizing the experience that we offered to each of you. And then, as we knew we were going to, you've got to have time series data before you could do analytics, but as we had 5 years of data, we began to think about analytics. As Chuck Harry joined us, having been at Cushman Wakefield in investment analytics, but with his experience in terms of focusing on taking multifamily from niche, not core, to core, and apply that to seniors housing. And then as Beth Mace joined us, having been on our board, but coming on board as our and the industry's first chief economist, and bringing that savvy and experience of doing research and doing presentations to folks that had multiple options amongst different types of commercial real estate property types. So who really understood what kind of data and how it had to be presented if we were going to make an impact. To Kimberly Sumner, who has really, again, taken our whole event experience as we've grown and made size not the challenge that would strangle us, but rather just continually enhance your experience at our events. And lastly, to Brian, who came on board with his background in data, big data, and analytics, and with a real vision for how we could take transparency in the sector and the use of data, and how we could build partnerships with other data providers to take NIC's data and therefore the sector's data to the next level. So there are many others I could mention. I mean, many of you know if you've ever spoken at an NIC event, you've gotten to know Debbie Cohen. And you know she has a unique brand of being, on the one hand, very differential to you, but making you feel enormously guilty if you don't deliver what she's asked you to deliver on time. So, and so just many wonderful staff. I want to close just in thanking those that have been my biggest cheerleaders and put up with a lot through the years, and that's my family. As Brian mentioned, 2 of our 3 daughters are here today. They saw me, had me be gone a lot of nights, but they did learn a lot of basic math and basic U.S. geography because they kept track of how many frequent flyer points and hotel points were needed in order for us to have the annual family vacation at Thanksgiving in someplace warm. So I would literally be told, Dad, it's October, you can't just go to New York, you need to go to the West Coast. You know, we've already figured out where we want to go, and we don't have quite enough points yet, because the whole idea was we would always take a family vacation because of Dad's travel. And lastly, I want to mention my soulmate for the last 48 years, my wife for the last 46 years, Diane. And thank you, Diane, for this has been a journey together. And I've been able to be on this journey because of you. And no one has put up, if you can imagine, I mean, some of you know how I can get going. Yes, Brian, I'm about to end. How I can get going. But can you imagine being the person who, because I rehearse many of my talks, can you imagine being the person that I've come home and you want to have a late dinner, and instead I said, would you like to listen to this talk I'm going to give tomorrow? Or let me tell you my thoughts about this meeting tomorrow and how I think it ought to go. Tell me, critique it. So she's put up with that for a long, long time. Finally, thank you to all of you in this space. I couldn't imagine a more challenging, rewarding, and fulfilling job than I've been privileged to have for the last 27 years. As those of you that know me well know, I don't believe in retirement. That means to sort of declare you're finished, you're done, you're going to go away. I believe in transitions. I'm thrilled for the role that Brian and the board have created for me, which I'm very excited about, and I'm passionate about this space. And that gives me a sense of purpose. And as we just heard in the NIC talks, that gives me 7.5 more years of my life, simply because I am motivated and I have a sense of purpose. So again, thank you very much. Really appreciate the honor.